Bugs crashing your pack's party? Whether they've got paws or sneakers, your pack deserves a home that's protected from pests. That's where Wonderside comes in. Plant-powered protection made with steam-distilled natural essential oils that actually work. It kills and repels fleas, ticks, mosquitoes, and ants without questionable ingredients or overpowering smells. Safe to use around kids and pets when used as directed, lab-proven to work fast, and proudly made in the USA. We offer sprays for pets, people, homes, and yards. Plus, spot-on treatments, collars, and even shampoos. Whatever your pack needs, we've got it covered. Founded by a pet parent looking for a better way to protect her dog Luna, Wonderside's now protected over 21 million lives and counting. You might have even seen us on Shark Tank. Go to Wonderside.com and use code WONDER20 for 20% off your first order. That's WONDER20 at Wonderside.com. Wonderside. Protect your pack with plant-powered Wonderside today.
Looking for a smarter choice for dental implants? Meet the Contact Dental Implant System from Biotech Dental, trusted by clinicians across Europe and now available in the US. With a single prosthetic connection, streamlined surgical kits, and seamless digital workflows, Contact makes every step easier. It's clinically proven, intuitively designed, and surprisingly affordable. See for yourself why more dentists are switching to Biotech Dental's Contact System. Visit biotechdental.com today to learn more. That's biotechdental.com.
December 15th, 1900. 3 experienced lighthouse keepers are maintaining their post on a remote Scottish island. 11 days later, when relief finally arrives, the lighthouse is dark. The door is unlocked, and all 3 men have completely vanished. No bodies, no blood, and no signs of a struggle. They left behind an untouched meal, an overturned chair, and one of history's most baffling disappearances. "20 miles west of the Isle of Lewis sits a cluster of 7 desolate rocks that sailors have been cursing for centuries. The Flannan Isles are basically nature's way of saying, you're not welcome here, in the most dramatic way possible. These are jagged, wind-battered chunks of stone that get hammered by North Atlantic storms so violent they can literally rip turf from cliff tops 200 feet above sea level. By 1900, the only permanent structure brave enough to call this hellscape home was a lighthouse. The Northern Lighthouse Board had spent 4 years building this beacon on Eileen Moor, the largest of 7 islands, and it was an absolute engineering marvel. Getting materials and workers to this remote outpost was dangerous enough in good weather. In winter, it was practically impossible. The lighthouse stood 75 feet tall, its beam cutting through the darkness to warn ships away from the killer rocks below. Maintaining this lifeline required men willing to live in complete isolation, enduring months of howling winds, crashing waves, and the kind of loneliness that could break weaker minds. The Northern Lighthouse Board recruited only the most experienced, disciplined keepers for this position, because amateur hour could get people killed. The crew stationed at Flannan Isles in December 1900 was as solid as they came. James Ducat was the principal keeper, a veteran who'd earned respect throughout the lighthouse service. Thomas Marshall was described as a large man seen as a gentle giant by locals, still in his 20s with 4 years of lighthouse experience. Then there was Donald McArthur, and here's where things get interesting. Donald McArthur was a local tailor who had served in the Royal Engineers and was said to have a nasty temper. In the tight quarters of a lighthouse crew, personality conflicts were common, and they could become explosive under pressure. MacArthur's reputation for being difficult was problematic for a job that required 3 men to live in each other's pockets for weeks at a time. The 4th key figure in this story never made it to the island. Joseph Moore was the relief keeper waiting on the mainland, scheduled to replace one of the men after the holidays. He'd later become the person who discovered the mystery, and the trauma of that discovery would eventually force him to transfer to a land-based position. These were specialized professionals. Lighthouse keeping demanded technical skills, physical courage, and mental resilience. The Northern Lighthouse Board maintained strict standards when staffing these remote positions because lives depended on the light staying on every single night. The last official entry in the lighthouse logbook was made by James Ducat On December 15, 1900, whatever happened next occurred in the span of a few days, and the first sign of trouble came from passing ships. On the night of December 15, 1900, the transatlantic steamer Arctur passed near Flannan Isle and noticed something was wrong. The lighthouse was dark. A dark lighthouse is catastrophic. Ships were depending on that beam to navigate safely through some of the most treacherous waters in the North Atlantic. The ship's crew immediately reported the failure when they reached port, and it took days for the message to reach the Northern Lighthouse Board and for them to dispatch a relief vessel. The Hesperus, the lighthouse tender responsible for supplying and staffing remote stations, couldn't depart immediately. Weather conditions were brutal, and attempting a landing at the Flannan Isles in rough seas was incredibly dangerous, even for experienced crews. For 11 agonizing days, the lighthouse remained dark while storms raged and ships navigated blind through waters that had claimed countless vessels. On December 26, 1900, Captain James Harvey finally managed to get the Hesperus close enough to the island for Joseph Moore to be winched onto the landing platform. The weather was still treacherous, but they couldn't wait any longer. Moore's journey up the winding path to the lighthouse compound was probably the longest walk of his life. What he found defied explanation. The entrance gates to the lighthouse grounds was unlocked, which violated basic security protocol. The main door to the building was unlatched and standing wide open. These were men who followed established safety procedures religiously because their lives depended on it. Inside the lighthouse, Moore discovered a scene that was simultaneously mundane and terrifying. In the kitchen, an untouched meal sat cold on the table. A chair was overturned on the floor. The clock had stopped ticking, its hands frozen in time. The beds were unmade, suggesting the men had risen and never completed their daily routines. The lighthouse equipment was in perfect order. The lamps were trimmed and ready for use, with full oil reservoirs prepped for the night's duty. These were the actions of professionals who intended to fulfill their responsibilities, the work of the men planning to keep that lighthouse burning through another night. On top of the cliff, at more than 200 feet above sea level, turf had been ripped away for as far as 33 feet from the cliff edge. This level of destruction at such heights indicated something incredibly powerful had hit the western side of the island. Normal storm damage couldn't reach those elevations. Robert Muirhead, the Northern Lighthouse Board superintendent who conducted the official investigation, declared that the Flannan Isle mystery was merely an accident. In his official report, he stated that 2 men had traveled to the West Landing around dinner time on December 15th. He theorized that the men had gone outside to secure equipment when a rogue wave swept them away. Lighthouse protocol absolutely required one keeper remain inside at all times to maintain the light. The fact that all 3 men seemed to have been outside simultaneously was a massive violation of fundamental safety rules. Experienced professionals like Ducat followed protocol religiously because their training demanded it. The missing oilskins suggested the men had prepared for outdoor work in harsh weather. The final logbook entry reportedly stated, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is good," indicating calm conditions when they might have ventured outside. Something happened that forced all 3 men to abandon their most basic operational requirements at the same time. The official rogue wave theory remains the most accepted explanation among maritime experts. Walter Aldebert, a keeper on the Flannans from 1953 to 1957, believed one man may have been washed into the sea and then his companions were trying to rescue him and were washed away by more rogue waves. This chain reaction scenario could explain why all 3 men ended up in the water despite protocol requiring one to stay inside. There were clear signs that a rogue wave had impacted the island, making this the most plausible explanation. Modern oceanographers continue studying how rogue waves develop and why they can be exponentially more powerful than surrounding sea conditions would suggest. The psychological theories deserve consideration. MacArthur had a reputation for brawling and was known to be violent. In the claustrophobic environment of a lighthouse crew, personality conflicts could escalate rapidly. The overturned chair could indicate a struggle, and if violence erupted between the men, it might explain why all safety protocols were abandoned. Other theories have ranged from the practical to the absurd. Some suggested the men tried to escape debts by staging their own disappearance, while others blamed foreign spies, sea serpents, or supernatural forces. Aliens. The lack of definitive evidence created a vacuum that wild speculation rushed to fill. When Muirhead arrived to conduct his official inquiry, he was working with limited physical evidence and no witnesses. His conclusion that a massive wave had swept away the men, it made logical sense given the storm damage, though it couldn't explain the contradictory details inside the lighthouse. The investigation faced the challenge that haunts many historical mysteries. The most important evidence had vanished with the victims. No bodies were ever recovered. No final messages explained what happened. The men had simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only questions and conflicting clues. One theory gained traction among modern researchers, and it involves a seismic event. Scientists have noted that seismic activity could have triggered both the massive wave damage and potentially caused the men to abandon their post in panic. An underwater earthquake or landslide could have generated the kind of tsunami-like wave that would reach the heights documented in the damage assessment. If the men felt the ground shake beneath their feet, experienced lighthouse keepers would know this would precede massive waves. They might have abandoned the lighthouse to seek higher ground, only to be caught in the very waves they were trying to escape. This theory accounts for why all three men left their post at the same time and why the damage was so extensive at such heights. The seismic theory also explains the contradictory logbook. The men might have recorded the end of the surface storm conditions while being unaware that far more dangerous forces were building beneath the waves. The Flannan Isles lighthouse continued operating for decades after 1900, eventually becoming automated in 1971. The island remains uninhabited except for occasional maintenance visits, its lighthouse beams still cutting through the darkness to guide ships away from those killer rocks. It was on December 15, 1900, that the last entries were noted by the keepers at Flannan Isle Lighthouse. What happened remains a mystery. Even the Northern Lighthouse Board acknowledges that the fate of James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald McArthur will never be known with certainty.